Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's LJC event with Adam and James. Let me introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Abby. I work with the LJC and a number of other communities, all of which are free and run by RecWorks. RecWorks are a tech recruitment company with a huge difference. So obviously, as a company, we're always on the lookout for more clients. And some of our best clients have come from community members who recommended RecWorks to their internal talent team. So if you're hiring for a new team or you're working for a company that is, we would love to have a chat with you. If you want to know more about what we can offer, just ping me a message on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Slack. My name is as you see it on the screen, and we really look forward to taking that conversation forward. So what's the difference? Well, also, we really do believe that recruitment can be a force for good in the industry beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus on learning, mentoring, and personal development. And that's where all of our communities and events come into play. If people want to learn and others want to share their knowledge, we are more than happy to connect you through our communities and events. We see this as giving back to those we've worked with in the past, but also paying it forward to those we hope to work with in the future. To date, we have run hundreds of different events for engineers, developers, students, graduates, CTOs. We have run conferences, lightning talks, hackathons, all sorts. We've made over 5,000 introductions through our Meet a Mentor community. We're really excited about that and looking forward to seeing where that goes next as well. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and this event is part of that. If you want to know more about the other communities we run, again, please do get in touch with myself or Helen Lewis if you know her, and we can take it from there. The recording of today's session will be available for you on YouTube. I will put the link to the channel in the chat. And if you're watching online, I hope you enjoy the session and find it really helpful and useful. Without further ado now, though, I'm going to hand over to Adam and James from Octopus Deploy, who are sponsoring today's session. So we're also really thankful for that. Over to you guys.
Yeah, excuse me. Clear my throat first. Thank you, Abby. Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Adam, and I'll do a formal introduction to myself and James in a second. So, yeah, first of all, thank you for giving up some of your time. I'm looking forward to kind of sharing some data that we got from a survey that we did at Octopus Deploy in the next 30 minutes or so. But please ask any questions as we go along. Myself and James will keep this as informal as possible. You know, whether it's about what you see on screen or if you have any other deployment related questions, please ask us. But we will probably have around 20 minutes left at the end to have a conversation or ask any questions that you might have. So yeah. So cool. Let's go on to some introductions. So you can see my pretty face on there, and James. So I'm Adam Close. I'm a solutions engineer here at Octopus Deploy. I've been here around, I think it'll be 4 years next week. I'll have been here. My background is software engineering and DevOps engineering. But before coming to Octopus, I was started out on the help desk at a software company that supplied software to the NHS. I went into software engineering. I wasn't great at it, but I found my skill set in DevOps and trying to automate all things CI/CD. So that's me, and I'm based in the UK. If you can't tell by my accent already, I'll hand over to my US counterpart, James, to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Pleasure to be here with you all. James Chatmus from across the pond on the east coast of the United States in Maine. Been with Octopus 4.5 years now, just started before Adam. And similar to Adam, prior life, I've always been a software developer. And then kind of in my most recent role before joining Octopus, I had extensive experience on a DevOps team in an enterprise setting, specifically on the release management team. So happy to be here with you all today for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you, James. So cool. Let's take a look at what we're going to go through today. So if you look at the agenda, I want to talk to you about a few short slides on how organizations are measuring success of deployment automation. Now, I could use two words for that, either success of deployment automation or success of your DevOps project. So if you hear me interchange those words, I'm classifying them as quite similar things. So when I say a DevOps project, if you have an application that you deploy, through dev, test, staging, and production, how do you measure the success of the deployment of that particular application? So we'll cover off a couple of slides around that. Then we're going to look at the positive effects that deployment automation has had on organizations. We're going to talk about a survey that we sent out to our customers to see, what are the positives, what are still the negatives or the constraints around automating your deployments as it stands right now. So yeah, again, per bullet point there, we'll go through the constraints in a little bit more detail. So jump ahead. So measuring success. Now, you may have already heard of this, so I apologize if I'm kind of going over old ground, but I want to talk to you a second about DORA Metrics. So DORA Metrics are used by DevOps teams, platform engineering teams, or if you don't have one of those, just engineers that are building an application and deploying an application, and they're used to measure their performance to find out which DevOps projects are low performers and which ones are the elite performers. And it's not to say, hey, keep prodding these people that potentially own a particular DevOps projects that they're doing a really bad job. Is to highlight what's working well in the elite performers, what's not working quite so well in the low performers, so we can all learn from each other. Now, there are four metrics, four DORA metrics to track success of deployments. And as you can see on the screen, that is deployment frequency, which is how often an organization successfully releases to production. The more times you're releasing to production, the better performant a DevOps team will be. Everyone wants to deploy more and faster to production. Second one, lead time for changes, the amount of time it takes to commit to get into production. So that is, a developer writing some changes, checking it into source control, pushing that out to dev, pushing it to staging, and then when it lands in production, the lower the time, the lower the lead time, the better. And then change failure rate, the percentage of deployments causing a failure in deployment. You want that percentage to be as low as possible. And then time to restore service, how long it takes an organization to recover from a failure in production. Some of these things that we do to automate and why we've introduced DevOps is to ship new features faster to get to our customers. But another thing that goes hand in hand with that is, if there's an issue, how quickly can we get out another deployment to actually fix that issue? So yeah, something I've learned this year, James. I wasn't really aware in the last 18 months of DORA Metrics, so I've certainly spent a lot of time looking into it and working out how these metrics are calculated. Yeah,
and I mean, to be fair, it's fairly new-ish. I think they were kind of first released in 2018, so they certainly haven't been around for decades, but certainly are beneficial for teams to kind of iterate on their processes and ultimately improve on them.
Yeah, I'm actually, if you want to delve further into DORA and the research team that came up with the DORA research team that came up with these metrics, they have these metrics now, and then now they're trying to research ways to actually increase or get better metrics. More frequent deployments, better lead time of changes. If you want to kind of delve more into that, they do have a community group. I have joined. I've been to an introduction session, and they have weekly catch-ups and sessions to talk more about these metrics. Cool. So if there's no questions, I'll move on to the next part. So kind of want to talk about what we call the state of deployment survey. And we did a survey. It was created by Octopus Deploy. It was completed by Octopus Deploy customers, and we had over 500 plus responses on that. Now, yes, this survey was around deployment automation, where it involved Octopus, but the whole idea of this was to understand has bringing in tooling, investing in people and training, adding resources to automation and to DevOps projects, have we managed to actually increase some of those metrics that we've just talked about? Have we managed to get better at DevOps projects? And we have a couple of I've got a couple of slides to kind of talk about and show you where, there has been positive effects. So yes, even though this was around Octopus customers, we can kind of say the same for any tool that you use for automating your deployments. If you are automating your deployments, you're doing a good job, and you can take some of these stats that we've got in the next few slides and relate them to any tool that you're using. Whether you use Jenkins for CI and deployment, or Team City, this is all about the automation part of it. So we're going to take you through a couple of slides first to show you who the survey went out to, just to kind of highlight it wasn't just kind of one industry we sent this out to. James, I don't know if you want to pick this slide up and talk about some of the organizations we surveyed.
Yeah, so so you all can read this. 29% of the responses were pure software companies. So something like Atlassian, right? They only make software. Another big portion was finance and insurance, and then the other responses, those are for all the other companies that have some sort of software that they make, but that isn't their primary business objective. So let's look at something like Bunnings or Home Depot. Like, they have computer software on the back end, but they sell hardware and tools. So companies like that, or like a health insurance company, those all fit into that other bucket here in this slide.
Yeah, thank you, James. I was always thrown off by when I've been talking about these stats. I was always thrown off by that big 50% other. I was thinking, I wish we really delved. I'd give a few more options as to what organization that could be, and we're going to run this survey again, and hopefully we do that. So, but yeah, I think, James, thank you for giving that explanation as to why we have this big 50% other in there. When we look at a software company now, every company near enough is a software company in some way. We talk about Burger King, they sell food, but they have a big software arm that goes with it. So yeah, thank you for explaining that. On to the next slide. Organization size. At Octopus, we have customers ranging from sizes with people with 1 to 50 employees, all the way through to over 10,000. So we've surveyed this across a range of company sizes as well. So this is kind of where we saw the really positive effects of deployment automation on one of these graphs. So we talked about increased deployment frequency. So the term deployment frequency I've already mentioned, but it's how often you deploy to production. So you'll likely deploy to pre-production environments, dev, test, staging, pre-prod, but they don't actually count towards the deployment frequency. So if you deploy software manually, these pre-production deployments can they can represent a significant time and effort cost, but they're not actually counted towards these metrics here. But after what we can see here in the highlight kind of green box is, after implementing deployment automation, we can see a huge increase in people deploying many times a day, and certainly several times a week. So what we wanted to see is less on, the kind of cadence of 1 or 2 times a year, but actually increased on weekly, 1 to 2 times a week. Now, I think 1 to 2 times a week and several times a day is probably the sweet spot for most organizations. There are constraints that are outside of an organization's kind of hold that they can do anything about. But when I saw this, I thought it was really positive. And again, just to remind you, this isn't just about a customer picking up Octopus Deploy. This is people are involved in this. Culture change is involved, changing from the way a developer checks in code, checks in his database changes, all the way through to how he deploys. And I think James James spoke about this earlier. The biggest one for me on this graph was we had a number of people on the survey that said before implementing automation and building a team around that, they had no idea of their frequency. And I've certainly been in that situation where I've been deploying software to servers, and it's been a manual copy and paste of zip files and binaries. I've had a Word document to follow a set of instructions. If somebody asked me how many deployments we did that year, I wouldn't have previously, before implementing any kind of automation or audit, I'd have no idea. So, James, I think for me that was probably the best thing to see on those results.
Yeah, that's huge. And then kind of if we look at going back to your green box and do some back of the napkin math, we've essentially gone from maybe a third of the companies that responded deploying 1 or more times a week to over 3/4. Once everything was automated, up to 3/4 of the respondents were deploying multiple, at least once per week. So it's a huge increase there as well.
Yeah, and again, it's worth saying again, that's the production deployments as well. So that's not even counting the pre-prod environment. So at the end of the day, the deployment we care about most is production. Those metrics are purely based on production and not pre-prod. So yeah. So again, I think it was kind of a celebratory moment for everybody in the industry to say, hey, the things we're doing, the time we invested into these tools and these and the people and the teams, it works. We'll get on to why we do it a little later on, but from this we know it works. So following on from that as well, that I talked about the deployment lead time as well. Again, we can see a huge increase that deployment lead time has been reduced. So this essentially becomes a question: has deployment lead time gone under an hour since you implemented deployment automation? We can see this on the graph, nearly 50% higher than without implementing automation. So that's huge. And again, we'll get onto reasons to why that's a good thing. But we've all been in a situation, or I certainly have, where I've done a production deployment before and it has all gone wrong. How quickly can I get another release? If there's a bug, not to do with the deployment itself, if we've released a bug, it happens and it's brought the system down, how quickly can we get a deployment on? If we can do that in less than an hour, that's really positive. And again, it looks great for our customers. So yeah, James, I know I wasn't, even when I implemented automation and Optimus at a previous company, I certainly didn't manage to get it down to less than an hour. So I'm not sure how I'd fare now, but it's good to see that our customers are managing to do that.
Yeah, and it was certainly a 90-minute to 2-hour plus process previously when I was doing everything manually. So yeah, getting it down to that, very manageable time frame is perfect.
Yeah, no, cool. So, okay. So from the survey, some of the key improvements with deployment automation, I'll quickly go through that. You can see what's on the screen, but nearly 5 times more likely to have a deployment time under an hour. Again, great for various reasons. Organizations that use deployment automation to increase their deployment frequency deploy on average 6 times more. Again, the more times you're deploying to production, the less scary it gets. Because if we're honest, production deployment is a scary time, and I think it gets more scary in different industries as well. So the more we do this, the more you increase that frequency, the better you're going to get at it. So it's great to see that number. 90%, 6% of companies achieved efficiencies in the first 100 days. Those efficiencies are down to hours saved, which in turn is kind of dollars saved as well. So if you ever need a reason to invest more in your DevOps projects and your automation, these stats are it. I know there's probably a little bit more that you need, but it does work, and it does save those hours and that dollar. And again, back up to the DORA metrics, 2.5 times more likely to meet DORA's high performance criteria for deployment frequency as well. So cool. So on to some of the kind of written surveyed responses, listed from 9 being the least mentioned to number 1 being the most mentioned on the survey. I'll not go through all of these, but I think, like, so number 9, help with compliance, audit, and collaboration. A lot of organizations need to their compliance and their regulations that they have to meet are very high. So seeing that on the list as well, that it has helped with compliance and audit, it's a great thing. And I think number 1, obviously for me, is the best one. They just need less effort. That's the whole aim of this. We want development teams focusing on their features for their customers to build a better product, not having to worry about how they manage to ship that to the end customer. So I know one of my drivers at my last organization to remove the manual effort, it wasn't really about timing or audit or compliance. It was, and we all laugh about this and we all joke about this, but we had developers that would release something, it'd go to production, and it didn't work. And we had the age-old response of, well, it works on my machine. And we needed to remove that. We needed to make sure whatever we were deploying into development was deployed. It was the same binaries, same infrastructure was deployed into production. So number 4, deployments work the same way every time. That helped us do that. We still got, on the odd occasion, it works on my machine. This was long before containers, so I think containers picks up a little bit of that. Kind of, we would deploy to Windows machines. Now you've got containers where if a developer is working against a container, then that will be what is in production. But that was my biggest driver, and we did see a lot of that, because whatever we were deploying to dev, not just the binaries, but the whole process, it was the same for production. Yeah, Abby, you got a question?
Yeah, there's one that's been popped in the chat, so I thought I'd chip in and ask it. So what about quality gates? How do you balance having enough versus not slowing things down?
That's a great question. So I think for me, it varies on different organizations. I think the more you have, obviously it's going to slow it down, but then if you have requirements for load testing, for example, if you've got a quality and a load testing environment that you need to go through, then there's a reason why you have to do that. James, I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. And I think that like quality gates overall should be implemented along the way, your software delivery lifecycle. So you're deploying to a test environment. We would assume that, or one would assume that you're doing some amount of testing in there, hopefully a lot of testing to make sure the software is ready for prime time. But if we kind of look at if we take a step back and kind of look at a quality gate, such as like a blue-green deployment or a canary type deployment pattern, we should be at a point where we're not releasing software out to end users unless we know everything is running properly and we don't have any bugs, and implementing automation along with some of those progressive delivery patterns is certainly a huge factor in getting quality software out the door.
I think, and to add to that, I think let's take a step back and look at that question. If you've got 10 quality gates to go through, okay, if you've automated this, okay, and you can do it in less than an hour, or you can get that deployment out quickly, I think the more quality gates you have, the better to start with. That's going to be clear as day. But I think the question should be, okay, if I have this many quality gates, I want to assure that the load's fine, the security is fine in these different gates, then as long as you've automated that, that's fine. So I think the focus should be, well, actually, if it takes me X amount of time to get through all these gates, then not look at reducing the gates, but actually focus on how to improve the automation behind them. We have customers that essentially they'll deploy to dev, then they might deploy to 3 different gates in parallel. So it's not a case of sequential; it just goes to all 3 environments so in one go. Now, if you have your automation locked down and it's fast, it's perfectly fine to have those quality gates. But yeah, there was a follow up to that.
Yeah. So the follow up is: do you have a preferred gate or tool, and why?
So my answer, I guess, spoiler, I already gave my answer. Huge proponent of progressive delivery patterns as like the final quality gate for releasing software. And with those implemented correctly, we should see either no errors making it out to customers or very few errors ever making it out into the wild.
Yeah, I think me personally, if the gates I've used before, I've never really had kind of load testing gates or anything along those lines. I've had blue-green, like James mentioned. I do love the blue-green pattern of having all my infrastructure spun up, deployed to that one while no users are on. And then when I know I'm ready to go with that one, it's a quick switch with a script just to switch them from the environment, and it's also a quick switch back. There are some things you have to consider with a blue-green. Your database is shared, and can you release? Is the code backwards compatible with the older database and that kind of thing? But I agree with James. I've used rolling deploys in the past, but I think that's probably more of the probably on the side of the deployments. But yeah, I think to wrap that up, blue-green all the way for me. Yeah. Hopefully that answers his question. If not, we can chat more at the end and talk more about it. James, just before I finish off on these kind of survey benefits, is there anything that's you think's been missed off here, or is there anything that you were happy to see when you were working on automating your applications?
Yeah, probably not much more to add above and beyond what you already stated, but certainly the number 4, having a consistent you know, no question mark when the deployment itself is happening is an ideal state to be in. So yeah.
Cool. So I'll move on. And okay, so we've talked about kind of how we measure the success, how we measure, what metrics are we using to measure success. We've looked at some results from a survey to say, hey, people, yeah, we're getting there, and we're deploying more frequently. We're deploying faster. What does that actually mean? What is that success? Shorter feedback loop to customers. As your changes are deployed more frequently, your customers get their hands on changes, like features and bug fixes quicker, and that's what we want. The faster we get a new feature out, the faster we get that feedback from the customer to make the next iteration on that change. If we have to wait 6 months before we can get the next iteration out, some of our customers may have stopped using that particular feature and potentially moved on. So that for me is a huge reason as to why being successful at this is a great reason to be successful. Reduce mean time to recover. How fast can we recover from our incidents? And it might not be an incident with the code that we've deployed. What if there's a security issue? What if there's something we need, some of our packages that are external to us that we use, where there's a security flaw, we need to get a patch out quickly. I can't remember the last big one. It was something there was a Java package, wasn't it, James? No, it wasn't. It was Log4. I always forget it's Log4j. Yeah, that was in tons of our not our application personally, Octopus, but across lots of organizations. How quickly can we fix that in our own application and get that out? If you're on a twice a year cadence of deployment, that's a long time to get that fix out. So it's not around, when we think about recovery, it's not just about things we do to our application and bugs that we introduce. It could be for all sorts of reasons. So again, I've talked about it in the short feedback loop, but reduce time to market for new features. It's great to get that feedback quickly. And then return on investment on costly manual deployments and all the CI/CD pipeline itself. We want our engineers spending less time on deployments and more time on actually building code and looking at other things in a DevOps project rather than just deployment. So yeah, anything I've missed from there, James? Or
yeah, the only one that is kind of big in my mind is basically once your deployments are automated, they should be, give or take, static, the process itself. And once that automation is in place and running smoothly, we should get to a point where, hey, we're never running into an issue with the deployment itself. We're always running into an issue with something code base related. So removing that deployment factor from kind of a break fix cycle is huge in the long run.
Yeah, agreed. So we're looking at the success and everything's great. There are still constraints, and we're going to talk about the constraints that were reported back in the survey, and also just some stuff that me and James have seen as we speak to our customers on a daily basis. So biggest constraint that was reported back from the survey is approval processes. They have all their automation in place. They have automation to deploy to dev, test, staging, production. What was the biggest thing that slowed them down? It was approval processes. Now, I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide of what particular things with an approval process slows it down, because approvals I think need to be there. I've worked in an industry where I've deployed software to healthcare, NHS, where I understand, approvals are there for a reason and they need to be there. But what actually an approval slows it down, I'll talk about in a second. So the other things that me and James we've been chatting about is, not things such as, the actual automation around the deployment itself. If let's say you've automated your pipelines and you're deploying to dev, test, staging, production really quickly, under an hour, multiple times a day, what other things outside of that can actually affect you actually doing that? Let's say you have the capability of it, but what other things can stop that? Things like documentation updates, release note updates, if security advice needs to be published, training on new features, marketing materials, all those kind of things. And what I mean by that is, just because you can deploy to production a couple of times a day and deploy new features whenever, well, actually, is the rest of the organization actually geared up for that as well? Let's take, for example, let's talk Burger King, for example. Burger King, they have stores all over the UK, all worldwide. And let's say you've got a new feature ready to go to some of their POS machines, the machines that the store uses to, price up the food and the till systems. And somebody releases a new feature to production at 1 o'clock. Have the store manager and the store employees been trained on a new feature? Can they go and check the documentation to see how the new system works? Those all this other things outside of the kind of DevOps engineering teams and developers that haven't really been thought about, that can be constrained. So it's great just to deploy straight to production, but we need to make sure our end users can actually use this software. And that's probably more when we talked about that other, the other stat in terms of the organizations we surveyed, where organizations the reason they generate revenue is not necessarily software, but they use software to facilitate that. They've got a lot of internal staff using that software. So, we need to make sure they're trained. And again, but if we talk about the time of when you deploy, if you've got a zero downtime deployment, just deploying at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, mid-shift, somewhere like Burger King, it's probably not a great idea to change up the system while the queues are huge and confusing the staff. So, James is going to talk a little bit more around, deploy versus release as well. Yeah, if you want to add anything there, James.
No, nothing to add on to this one.
I'll jump in and just quickly cover off the approval process, and then we'll jump into deploy versus release. So in terms of approvals, what was the biggest thing that slowed people down when it comes to approvals? Essentially, it was the kind of lack of automation around approvals. So they didn't essentially have a service management tool such as ServiceNow or Jira Service Desk to automate the approvals. They'd have some kind of manual, potentially a cab meeting, for example, that happened every 2 weeks, that they had to wait for that cab meeting before they could then approve the changes for it to go out. So, they were waiting on a cycle of the cab meeting. But then the biggest thing there is a single deployment gatekeeper. If there's one person in your organization that can approve a deployment, is he on holiday? Is he there? Has he responded to the email for the approval? That was the biggest constraint that came back from the survey. And ways around that, it's automating that process, bringing tools to automate it and remove the single gatekeeper. Have a team of people that can approve a deployment. Let's not wait for a schedule of a cab meeting every 2 weeks, for example. Back in my old organization, our cab was every Thursday, but that wasn't frequent enough. I used to have to, so we'd get a change ready for Monday, then we'd have to wait till Thursday before we could even ask for permission. We need to remove that and have it automated where a change can be raised and approved, on the same day by the right people. So, yeah, I think there was a start. there were if people were limited by the approval constraint, they were 4 times less likely to make efficiency gains if this was an issue. So yeah, this is that. James, I'll hand over to you to talk about deploy versus release.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so deployment versus release. The two terms often used interchangeably when we're talking about DevOps and CI/CD pipelines and similar. Fundamentally different though, and I'll explain how and why. So a deployment, when you talk about a deployment, it refers to moving your code from, we've checked it in, we're moving it from a development environment up through the different stages to ultimately our production environment. And it's really the technical process of installing and configuring our software. So deployment usually involves, running scripts, transferring packages, configuring config files and similar. When we deploy the software, making sure it runs correctly in that environment. A release is when our deployed software is made accessible to our end users. So we may have our latest release of software deployed out to our production environment, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily been released out into the wild yet. The release itself could be handled through feature flags, configuration changes, or even flipping a switch and on just to make the service live. So if we talk about why does this distinction matter? A deployment is not the finish line. That's not the end all be all. Just because the code is deployed out doesn't mean it's ready for prime time. And releases often involve, technical, non-technical or business considerations. So Adam mentioned a few earlier, documentation, customer readiness, market timing, maybe even legal constraints about when a release can happen versus a deployment. So when we know and we've kind of defined those differences, it allows us to bring in what I mentioned earlier, kind of those progressive delivery patterns, blue, green, canary, and those allow you to measure your impact kind of slowly and in a controlled way without exposing, your entire user base to potential bad issues. So if we kind of wrap that all up, my deployment versus release monologue, and then relate it back to this automation and automating our deployments. When we automate our deployments, we're focusing on streamlining those deployment specific pieces, which as return on that, the business can have more control and more flexibility over the release part. And we do that through automation by reducing human error, increasing our speed out the door, all the benefits that we've been talking to along the way. So anything to add to that, Adam?
No, I think that kind of covers off what I was talking about with my little Burger King scenario there, where I think the reason why I like you saying this is we get I see a lot of people that not focus too much, but that they look at what they're doing, they're not deploying to production every single day, but that's okay. There are constraints to that in terms of as long as you have the ability to do it, that's great. But like you said, the business then has the control over when it goes out to, like you say, prime time to all organizations. Cool. So thank you. Yeah, thank you, James. And I'll lastly cover off with, how do we make deployment automation happen? First of all, tooling. I'm clearly going to be biased here and say Octopus is the best tool for deployment automation. But there are lots of tools on the market that will help you automate, the CI and CD part of your DevOps projects. But another huge thing is people and teams. You can have all the tools in the world, but if the teams aren't invested into trying to achieve these goals and fix some of the constraints, none of it's going to work. People and teams need to all be in sync and on board with what everyone's trying to achieve. Again, and a desire driver to make those deployments better. Yeah, and then lastly, they're continuous learning and improving. Using those metrics that we talked about. If you have right now a number of DevOps projects, applications, if you implement those metrics that we talked about, the DORA metrics, find out which applications are doing well, which ones aren't, take bits from one to put into the other to get them all to elite performers. So, hopefully, just to kind of wrap up, we've talked about how deployment automation has a positive effect on organizations. Investing in DevOps and tooling has been positive. Kind of why we're trying to deploy to production faster and more regularly. We've also covered off the constraints that can affect deployment automation. And that's the end of our presentation. If there are any questions or if anyone wants to take anything offline, we can do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adam and James, for coming to share some of what you know. That was really interesting to hear about the remarkable differences that your customers saw from automating. That's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? It just, if you need a business case, that's it right there, isn't it?
You're exactly right.
And I think obviously that like I said at the start, that obviously is focused on Octopus, but take that with any automation tool. If you need a business reason to invest in people and tools, that's it. And hopefully, once we've digested the rest of the survey as well, we'll have some more. We will have a white paper on this. I'll happily share with the people on the webinar today.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Can look more into that.
Excellent. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm just going to give it a few moments in case anyone's going to start typing in the chat.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that as a no. So all that is left for me to say is, again, thank you so much, Adam and James, for coming and sharing some of what you know with us. And thank you, everybody who's been able to join us online for the event. And if you're watching the video, I hope you found the session really interesting. And I'm sure if you want to know any more or have any further questions, get in touch with Adam or James, and they'll be able to have a chat with you and continue the conversation. So all that's left for me to say now is have a great rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are. And thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. We do have, there is an event happening as well, just to let you know. There is an LJC event again on the 14th of September. We have an event with Hazelcast. So if anybody wants to come and join us for that, you can find details on our LinkedIn, Twitter, and on Eventbrite and Meetup as well. So we look forward to seeing you there. Take care.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you. Take care, guys.